Welcome to Fables and Fairy Tales. So this is a discussion about Frankenstein, the book, or The Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley. Discussing the two different versions of this book. There's one from 1818, and then she revised it and republished it in a second edition in 1831. So a quick summary of this story is about Frankenstein, and for starters, Frankenstein is not the monster. I'm sure people have heard this before, but the monster is just called the monster, or the creature, the demon, or even the wretch. I would have to say that as I read it, I felt like I read the word wretch more than anything else. But Frankenstein is actually the man who created the monster. Victor Frankenstein. I've heard people refer to him as Dr. Frankenstein, but I actually don't think he was a doctor. Not at any point in the book did I read that he was a doctor. He was actually just a student at college and not a professor of any kind. And his name is just Victor Frankenstein. Anyway, so we learn about his childhood as he's growing up, and then he goes away to college. Well, actually, before all this, he gets these books about these philosophers. One, I think, is named Agrippa, and I can't remember the name of the other writer, but they seem to be the ancient naturalists. Their science and their philosophy has been debunked already, where they talk about reanimation, finding the philosopher's stone, and the elixir of life, all stuff that is false. However, he had his mind, basically, his mind was very strongly affected by these philosophies, and he did not learn natural, normal science and philosophy first. And so these took preeminence in Frankenstein's mind at a young age. So when he went to college, he had professors that tried to put him on the right track. But it seemed that they did not fully succeed. He kept these readings and preeminence in his mind still. But anyway, in college or university in Geneva, he eventually came to the conclusion that maybe he could create life. And then at some point, he did discover how to do animation. And then he spent months, it may have been a year or more, creating the creature, the monster. Then finally, once he did create the monster, he was terrified of it and ran from it. And then the monster just disappeared. And then Frankenstein had to recover with the help of his friend Clerval, who is a man that he grew up with as a boy. Then his life begins to become wrecked. Oh, again, this spoiler warning for everything I'm going to be talking about. Everything in the book, even the very end. But he then discovers or learns that his younger brother is killed by someone, and he immediately suspects it's the monster. And then a girl who essentially was raised as a servant in his house, somehow evidence is against her that she may have killed the boy, which to me doesn't make any sense. Anyone in modern CSI or whatever could look and see that there's no way this boy's windpipe probably could have been crushed by such a young girl. That it would have had to have been a very strong person. So that doesn't make any sense from a modern perspective. But anyway, we're dealing with science fiction and a book and even scientific matters that are outdated. But anyway, so Justine, this young girl, is framed essentially by the monster, actually, because it is the monster who killed the boy and then framed the girl. So then the girl actually is found guilty, and she is, I believe, hung. So So that's 2 deaths. And Frankenstein does not say anything. He doesn't tell anyone that he created a monster and that he knows the monster did the kill. So then later, Frankenstein meets the monster, and the monster demands him to make him a mate because he has no mate. The monster has no mate and thinks he deserves to have a mate, and is able to philosophically convince or guilt trip Frankenstein into making him a mate. So Frankenstein decides he needs to go and travel to England to meet with other naturalists or professors to find out more stuff before he makes this female monster. I think he spends a year in England. His friend Clerval comes with them. They travel around. I actually don't really recall in the book if he actually met with these professors. I don't know if it actually even happened. These people he wanted to meet with. That still is unclear to me. But eventually he was able to get a loan in Scotland and began to make this female monster. When he realized what he was doing and was worried that he was going to doom the human race by creating essentially a race of monsters, especially if the male and female monster create posterity. So he destroys this creation. But the creature who was at the window saw this and then essentially told Frankenstein that I'm going to be there on your wedding night, which Frankenstein took to mean that the monster was going to kill him on his wedding night. He didn't think it had anything to do with his future bride, Elizabeth. He thought it had to do with him. And then later, that monster kills his friend Clerval in another part of Ireland or England. Not certain which. Actually, yeah, it was Ireland, now that I think of it. And then eventually when he's home, he becomes engaged to his, essentially his betrothed girl that his family had taken in. In the earlier version, it was his literal cousin. In the latter version, it's actually a poor girl who was taken into their family and essentially adopted. And he called her his cousin. But anyway, then he marries her, and the night before they can even consummate their marriage, he's in the hallway watching for the monster, thinking it's going to show up, and it kills his wife. And then the rest of the book is he's trying to hunt down the monster all across Europe and Russia and other countries, and eventually ends up in the Arctic North, I believe, where he eventually falls frail and sick from his exposure to the elements and his extreme psychological exhaustion and anxieties, and he dies on board a ship. And then I left out this earlier portion, but this entire book starts first with a ship captain named Walton, who also is ambitious, just like Frankenstein, wanting to explore the North Seas. And he meets Frankenstein on board his ship. They save him because he's on a dog sled, and all his dogs had died, and the ice was melting, and he was going to drown in the cold seas he's taken in. And this is where we get the whole story. Frankenstein tells the story to the ship captain, Walton. So then, after Frankenstein dies, Walton meets the monster, because the monster climbs aboard the ship and sees his creator is dead, and begins to moan the loss of his creator. And there's a very interesting conversation between ship captain Walton and the creature. And the creature essentially is somewhat penitent, I believe. He's still, I think, upset about the way he's been mistreated by the human race. But he's sad about having destroyed the life of Frankenstein and then caused the death of his creator. And essentially, he promises he's going to go into the far north, and that's, I assume, in Antarctica or something like that. And he's going to set up a funeral pyre and burn himself and kill himself. And I like some of the comments that Walton makes where he says, oh, this is interesting for you to say that you're sad about the death of your creator. It's like a man throwing a firebrand into a building and burning it to the ground and then sitting among the ashes and being sad that the building's burned down. I thought that was, now that's not a direct quote, it's my own version of it, but I thought that was a very profound quote from the ship captain Walton. So then the monster jumps off the ship and disappears in the darkness, and it's ambiguous. We don't know what happened after that. One quick note was about from the monster's perspective, is the monster ran out of the city of Ingolstadt where he was created, and eventually, I guess, essentially became sentient and conscious of things. And, didn't know what light and dark was, figured that out. Didn't know what trees were, figured that out. He had to figure out where birds were. There was one time he had to figure out how to eat and what he could eat. He discovered, someone left a fire lit in the forest, and he kept that going for a while. But he didn't know how to create fire. He, one time, wandered into a village and was attacked by all these humans and ran for it. He didn't know why they were attacking him. I think eventually he did start realizing how ugly of a creature he was and how scary he was. I can't remember the name of his family, but he eventually somehow gets in a situation where he is essentially right next to a cabin where a destitute family is who used to be wealthy, and he watches this family and falls in love with them. I think he watches them for essentially a year. And by listening to them, he learns their language, which I believe is French. I believe he learns French, and then he finds 3 books that he learns to read. One is Plutarch's Lives. The other one is, one is I can't remember the other name of the other 2 books, but one is about the fall of Satan. Man, I'm gonna kick myself. I can't believe I don't remember that book. But anyway, so he found these 3 books and he learns to read them. And I guess this is essentially where he finally gains the idea of justice and what is deserved, I guess, by people. And he comes to the conclusion he needs connection with others. But anytime he's tried, things have gone wrong. He eventually tries to make contact with his family, but again, because of what he looks like and the monstrosity of him, he is cast out. And this just pushes him over the edge, and he swears vengeance on the human race. And eventually the family leaves, and he burns down the cabin that they were in. Later, as he is traveling, because he actually discovers who his creator is, it's Frankenstein. He's heading toward that home when he finds a girl who was drowning. He saves her life, but then her father sees him and takes the girl from him, and I think shoots him with a gun, which once more incenses him against the human race, and he desires to destroy them. So then eventually, when he actually finds a young boy, he decides he wants to take this boy and raise this boy himself, I believe, raise this boy himself to love him. Then the boy says he is a descendant of Frankenstein. And the name triggers essentially the monster. The monster throttles him. And he's not sad about it. He actually takes glory in the fact that he took a life, and that he has control over that. So that's where it began. And then he explains how he framed Justine, the girl. And that's the other side of the story that we don't get from Frankenstein's perspective. But that is a quick summary of the plot of the book. And now to move on into my thoughts and my breakdown of my opinions and the philosophies of this book.